My name is Clara Nyst, and I'm the Legal Director at Privacy International. We get that all the time. I think my initial response is that, the best way to argue against that, I think, is to say everybody has something to hide. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the idea that you might want to hide something does not have to be connected to the idea that you've done something wrong. I think we all hide various parts of our lives from various people in our lives. We all kind of have some understandings of privacy and what we'd like to keep secret and what we wouldn't like to, what we're happy for to be public. And, often we get told, well, kids these days don't care about privacy, they put everything on Facebook. But I think that there's much more nuance to the argument than that, because that these kids aren't letting their parents access their Facebook profiles, for example. People still keep passwords on their phone and passwords on their email, and I think there is still a connection to that. So I think firstly, we all have something that we don't want the government to see. But from a far more principled level, the right to privacy is not about the government choosing when they don't interfere in our kind of private lives. It's a fundamental kind of principle of any democratic society that the starting point is we should be allowed to hide unless there are certain circumstances in which the government should have access to that data. So I think the line that comes from GCHQ and others on that is completely undermines the whole point of human rights, which are that they exist whether or not the government thinks they should. They exist because they are fundamentally part of who we are as human beings. The right to privacy has long existed. It's really plays an important barrier between state control and individual freedom. And it's not up for the government to kind of water that down in the name of some kind of amorphous concept of security that we're gaining out of this whole thing. And I think that's the other side to the debate, which is we're told you have to give up your privacy in name of security, national security, or otherwise. And we've not seen actually any evidence that we gain something more by giving up so much. And I think that that's where their arguments in that respect fall down. And there's no evidence, or none that they will show us, that by giving up some privacy we gain a little more security. I think that that's a completely empty debate. And until we can have that out in the open and be really shown the evidence, and perhaps then as a society we'll decide that, yeah, we're happy to give up a little more privacy. But as long as we're only given kind of empty promises and kind of baseless assertions, then we can't really have that debate. Sure. I think that most people don't really consider that they should have to worry about anything when they're thinking about internet privacy. So I think the most general kind of issue for most people, I think, is kind of corporate use of data, and the need for them to understand how their data is being used by corporations to make decisions about them, perhaps to sell them products or to not sell them products, to make decisions, for example, about whether to give them a credit card or not. I think that there's a lot of issues around how corporations use data that is probably at the forefront of, if people think about any privacy issues, it's probably going to be those that are at the forefront of their mind. But obviously there are much more kind of structural, fundamental issues around state surveillance that we say should be at the forefront of everyone's mind, but doesn't kind of really hit home with most people, with the exception of people who have a higher degree of awareness about their privacy online, so journalists, human rights defenders and activists and others. And I think in that respect, state surveillance absolutely poses the biggest risk to their privacy and to their other human rights as well. I think for your average Joe on the street, they are more concerned about their relationship with companies and how their privacy might be infringed upon by companies, and also how other rights they have might be infringed upon, particularly around kind of discrimination and economic rights. Okay, so big data is actually there was a really great comment going around a while ago, which is that it's kind of like teenage sex. Everybody's talking about it and nobody's doing it. And so it's kind of been sold as this like solve-all for public service delivery, for infrastructure management. At the UN, it's being sold as a way to, you know, sell development and help developing countries make the most of their resources, even as a way of compiling information about human rights abuses. So it's kind of sold as a catch-all for everything and anything. What it actually is the fact that the amount of data that we produce about ourselves and our communications and our activities has increased exponentially over the past decade. And what big data stands for is the fact that there are now pieces of data that are generated about us that have not, the type of data that is generated about us has changed and has multiplied, and also the means of analysing that data and bringing disparate pieces of information together has changed. There is now kind of data about data that can be pieced together. So the term big data means not only a change in the volume of data, but also the types of analysis that are applied to it. In terms of what benefit it can bring, I think that information does play a huge role in kind of policy making, in development, and I think that by knowing more we can do better things. But I think there is a real danger to think that we can A, know everything, and B, know it in a way that still concords with the right to privacy. So one of the concerns around big data is that data sets which are anonymised for the use of analysis can be de-anonymised, so that individuals can be specifically pulled out of big data sets and identified. So, for example, in addition to which, not only individuals but groups of people. So, on the basis of their ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, might be able to be identified amongst big data sets. So, an example is the phone company Orange made public all of their cell phone tower records for a group of researchers at MIT and asked them to do big data analysis on those records, which were cell phone locations over a year period, but anonymised data. So every Orange user it was in the Côte d'Ivoire, had their cell phone data handed over to MIT. And the project, it was a competition, and the winning project redesigned the bus routes in Côte d'Ivoire to kind of minimise bus congestion and improve people's journey times. But a number of other papers were also submitted, and a number of them showed that the same data could be used to track religious groups or ethnic groups in the Côte d'Ivoire and their kind of location throughout certain times of the day. So you can imagine the kind of value of that information. And the concern is that we're pushing through with this in contexts in which there's no legal regulation. There are, in some countries, particularly when it's been touted as a development tactic, there's very serious historical conflicts and political and social contexts that have to be taken into consideration. So I think that the concern with big data is that we're kind of rushing ahead with this as a catch-all, save-all for everything, and we're not really sure yet what the potential concerns are. And just in addition to the kind of privacy ones, I think that there is also the need to think about how data becomes authoritative and the kind of a statement of the truth, where in fact, of course, data can be manipulated and can misrepresent situations. And I think that we're seeing a very strong move in certain sectors towards data being the kind of key to everything. Even the United Nations has said we need a data revolution in understanding how to do development and human rights. And I think that there's a bit, there's some concern is warranted, and some kind of hesitancy around that is a necessary thing before we kind of run full steam ahead at it. I think that there's kind of two areas of concern when it comes to corporate use of data. I think one is what I alluded to earlier, which is that they now have such huge amounts of data about us and unforeseen abilities to analyse that data and to draw out correlations and profiles on us as users that they've never had before. And on the basis of that information, they are not only kind of advertising things to us, but as we all know, we're receiving kind of specifically tailored advertising, but they're also making decisions about us, about which products to market to us, and also about who we are, basically. They're creating a profile of who we are. And I think that that's really concerning, because the power that corporations have is increasingly great. And the fact that they have a profile of the most intimate and sensitive things in our lives, and are storing that information and using it to make decisions about us, can be really concerning, because we have no means of redress. They have no accountability to us. And we're really in very much a power imbalance with corporations, particularly because lots of the products that they offer us are for free. And so, as the kind of old adage is, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. I think that there's very much has kind of emerged this power imbalance where we have we seemingly have no rights against a company like Google, and yet they have every piece of information about us and can make very strong decisions about us. There are quite a few anecdotal examples of also when other companies are using online data to, as I said before, market credit cards, even make decisions about whether or not to give people credit cards or extend finance to them on the basis that they've visited certain websites or shopped in online stores that are associated with people who default on their credit card payments. So we know that all this data is out there and being linked up by companies in ways that we don't have control over. So I think that that's really one area of concern. I think the other major thing that companies are doing wrong is storing this data and then handing it over to governments. And if they didn't keep the data in the first place, it wouldn't be there for the NSA to access, it wouldn't be there for GCHQ to access. And I think that they've only really recently realised how complicit they are in facilitating state surveillance, because their whole business model rests on the collection of information and the analysis of that information. So I think that the kind of close ties between the government and companies in that respect is really problematic for kind of your modern internet user. In terms of means and methods of fighting back against that and kind of seeking redress, unfortunately, I mean, I'm a lawyer and I start from a legal point of view. Unfortunately, there's very few ways that we can get legal redress against companies because governments have pushed back on any suggestion that companies have human rights obligations under law. I think there are definitely ways that users of services can influence companies through kind of collective action and consumer advocacy, public awareness raising. In some cases, it's a matter of we kind of have to vote with our feet. We have to make companies realise that we have to give them incentives to improve our privacy protections, I think. And we have to make them realise that it's kind of going to be there's financial incentives for them to put better privacy protections in place in order to ensure that they retain customers. But again, as I said, I mean, perhaps I sound a bit cynical, but I think that the power imbalance is so great between companies and individuals that there needs to be kind of legal intervention and regulation in order to ensure that companies do respect individuals' rights to privacy. I'm not convinced that they will do so just out of the good of their heart or out of kind of following public concern or public awareness. I think at the end of the day, it's really down to organisations like ourselves and other activists to push for stronger responsibility, real kind of corporate responsibility on behalf of corporations in order to get real change in that respect. So I think that the general public can start by being less defeatist in their attitude to privacy online. I think that there is a tendency for people to think that the power imbalance is so great that they can't do anything, and therefore why should I, there's nothing I can change. I can't leave Google, actually. I feel the same way. I couldn't take up and leave my Google account. So what can I may as well just not worry about it. I think that kind of defeatist attitude is not conducive to pushing for change. I think we all need to remember that we're not at a point where our emails are postcards, and we, even if the government tell us that's how we should think, we are still in a position to push back against that. And I think a kind of renewed resolve against all the powers that be telling us to just forget about online privacy is essential before we're going to get any change in this respect. And I think the other thing is that we, or citizens, should be less accepting of arguments that terrorism is is a sufficient justification for completely eradicating online freedoms. I think that many people are very willing to kind of lap that up unquestioningly. And as I said earlier, I don't think it's borne out on the evidence that the range of intrusions into our civil liberties is ever going to result in a higher level of security. And I think perhaps we need to just stop being so afraid and stop being so willing to kind of buckle at any mention of terrorism and national security issues, and be so willing to let governments use those as excuses to take away our human rights. I think we need to accept that in any society there's going to be a level of insecurity all the time, and what we give up to improve that, we should only do so after much contemplation and serious debate. And I think we've been too willing to say they're right. If it means they get one terrorist, then I'll let them read all my emails. I mean, friends of mine have said that to me, and I think that that's a really frightening approach, and we should all be a little bit more discerning and questioning in how we accept what the government feeds us.